I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you with us tonight here on Closing Arguments. It's a verdict night, and usually I'll throw on a red tie for a verdict. But there was something different about this verdict. It's how we got to this verdict. I'm talking about Chandler Halderson. This is the guy accused of murdering his parents, dismembering their bodies, and scattering their remains. And as we watched this trial, it was time for the defense to go. And you know what defense we got? We got the Seinfeld defense. It was a defense about absolutely nothing. Nothing. That turned this trial into the march to the inevitable because the defense didn't have anything. And sometimes you don't have anything because you don't have anything. And the defendant is guilty, and he's obviously guilty. And there is a mountain of evidence. And today, the jury agreed. Take a look.
The verdict form on count 1, as signed by the presiding juror and dated today, reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 1 of the amended information. As to the verdict form for count 2, as signed and dated, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 2 of the amended information. Verdict form for count 3, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 3 of the amended information. Verdict form for count 4, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 4 of the amended information. The verdict form for count 5, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 5 of the amended information. The verdict form for count 6, as signed and dated by the foreperson, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 6 of the amended information. The verdict form as to count 7, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 7 of the amended information. And finally, the verdict form for count 8, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 8 of the amended information.
I wasn't surprised. You weren't surprised. And from looking at the video, it didn't look like the defendant was surprised either. And I understand and I appreciate the right to remain silent. But think about what this case was about. It was about murdering your parents and chopping them into pieces, putting their skulls into the fireplace and setting them on fire. I mean, all those things. Like if someone accused you of doing that, would you remain silent? And then if 12 people came back and said, oh yeah, you did it, would you remain silent? Like nothing? Well, I think that speaks volumes to us. I think the jury got it right. I think we're all very comfortable with this verdict tonight. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chandler Painter, who's joining us live tonight. Chandler, great to see you. So what's next here for Halderson?
Well, now that he has been convicted on all counts, including that intentional homicide, Vinny, it's a mandatory life without parole there in Wisconsin. So after the verdict was read, the judge did order a pre-sentencing investigation. The defense didn't feel it was necessary, but the judge did order it, and he will be formally sentenced in March.
All right. Any other post-verdict reactions? You know, sometimes you see it from one side, the other. Sometimes you hear from the attorneys. What happened today?
Well, inside the courtroom, we witnessed what the defendant did, which was really no reaction, but the family of Bart and Krista sitting on the opposite side with the prosecutors, left with the prosecutors. The head DA there, though, in Dane County, Wisconsin, did speak to the media about his reaction. Let's watch.
I would say that, we are grateful for this outcome. We hope that it brings some satisfaction, although bittersweet. We know that we cannot bring Bart and Krista back, but this is the first step to hopefully some finality in this situation.
Vinny, he went on to thank the investigators. Remember, this only happened last July, and this prosecution was able to call 67 witnesses, forensic data, results, a quick investigation, and he thanked all those involved.
Yeah, it's not an easy case. I mean, not easy to put it together. I mean, that was the problem. It was a crime scene that was spread out across Dane County. It was a strange case, and you had to tell a story to the jury, and I think the jury got it. Let's talk, though, about the closing arguments today. Some of your takeaways from what we heard from both sides.
Yeah, Vinny, the defense didn't put on a case. The defendant didn't testify, so I was anxious to hear what, if anything, they would argue in closings, and a couple of things stood out to me. They admitted that Chandler Halderson was a liar. They admitted that something bad happened, and he did help hide and conceal his parents' bodies, but they harped on intentional, and whether or not it was an intentional homicide or an accident. There was one point, though, in the defense closing where the attorney could read the room, if you will. Let's watch.
Something awful happened to these two people. And the very least you can say is that Chandler reacted. But you do not know what happened. And I know some of you have already made up your mind. I see it, and that's fine. Maybe you do think he murdered his parents. The question I have for you is, did the state meet their burden when it comes to first-degree intentional homicide?
I watched that jury for several days, and I'm not surprised at her comment, being able to read their reactions. They weren't following along with her, Vinny. And the prosecution, when Mr. Williams got up after for the rebuttal, he took issue with the defense, saying, no, this could have not been intentional. Let's watch.
Miss Vera just stood up here and said, what if this was an awful accident? Bart Halderson was shot in the back twice. You do not fall down and shoot yourself in the back twice. Bart Halderson and Krista Halderson had their heads chopped off, had their arms and legs removed. That was an awful accident.
That's William Brown, and he made it sound pretty ridiculous what the defense did try to bring forward.
Yeah, I don't blame the defense. I mean, that's the way the system works. Someone's got to be there. Someone's got to make the arguments. But again, very little to work with. Chanley Painter, great to have you tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Vinny.
All right, let's bring in our think tank. Joining us tonight in the Bronx, New York, criminal defense attorney Renee Hill. In Houston, Texas, criminal defense attorney Carmen Rowe. And in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney, law professor at Emory University, and Georgia Innocence Project board member Molly Palmer. Great to see you all. Oh, you're in a different order than I thought, but here we go. Let me ask you, Renee, have you seen the Seinfeld Defense before? It's a defense about absolutely nothing. And that's what it was today. I mean,
Vinny, in the defense world, this trial has been what we call a slow plea. And there are times that we have to deal with clients who, against our advice, wish to go to trial. And they are entitled to do that. And it is our job to protect their rights and to ensure that they get a fair trial. And that's what his attorneys did here. And that's all they could do for him, was hold the people to their burden and make sure that their client received a fair trial.
Molly Palmer, let me ask you something. And yeah, I've read the Constitution. I know you have a right to remain silent. I know it's probably the best tact for most criminal defendants, right? Especially the guilty ones. But someone has just accused you of shooting your parents, chopping off their heads, throwing it in the fireplace, chopping off their arms, chopping off their legs, spreading it all over the county. You might take offense to that if you were innocent, right?
Yeah, I mean, you might, but you reference this right to remain silent. He's also entitled to the right to a trial by jury. and all of these other constitutional rights that he exercised. But here's the thing, we don't see behind the scenes the conversations with Chandler Halderson and his lawyer. And I have a sense that when you are potentially, and I'm just, maybe rushing to judgment here, but sociopathic enough to do such a crime, it's probably a very difficult conversation to have with your lawyer to say, listen, I'm going to trial no matter what, okay? And that's what happened. That's the sense I have, that this kid basically insisted on a trial and his lawyer didn't have anything to say. And certainly, no, he showed no reaction. He never made any statement whatsoever. I think all of this is why he ended up in a trial posture rather than perhaps listening to his attorney's advice and taking a plea of some kind. All of this to me seems consistent with the Chandler Halderson we got to learn about during the course of this trial.
All right, Carmen, how does this work now? Let's say, for instance, and it didn't happen here, that, everyone knows he's guilty, but he decides to take the witness stand. What, like, as a criminal defense attorney, how do you handle that, right? Because you're not supposed to put people up that you know are not telling the truth. So how does that work in our system?
Vinny, it doesn't work with a defendant who has a laundry list of lies that are predating the trial. So this particular defendant is a habitual liar, and they put that on display. So there's not much we're going to do with him in the course of a trial where you just have lie after lie after lie. So he's the kind of defendant that you would never want to put on the stand because, one, we know he's not a truth teller. Two, they put up a number of witnesses to make it very clear that he was lying about things like having a job, volunteering at a different location. I mean, just his entire life was a lie. So, the lawyers can do what they can do outside of a defendant's statement. But in a case like this, with a defendant like this, there's no way I would put him on the stand.
Yeah, there was one other defendant who lied about having a job years ago down in Orlando. I mean, when she was being questioned by police, she said, yeah, I work at Universal. And she took him to Universal and was walking through the hallways. And then finally at the end, she's like, well, yeah, I don't really work here. But the jury didn't mind. They didn't mind. Anyway, you're with us the whole hour. Renee Hill, Molly Palmer, Carmen Rowe. When we come back, the trial we're also covering here on Court TV, really heating up. Again, in Wisconsin, which is now the new Florida. Wisconsin versus Theodore Edgecombe. It's a case about self-defense. That's what the defense is. It's self-defense. We know that this defendant shot a man in the face and killed him. The question is, was he entitled to do it? We'll talk about that case when we come back.